For the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Clausen.
Here.
Commissioner Cox.
Here.
Commissioner Graven. Here. Commissioner Phipps.
Here.
Mayor Hall.
He's here. Presentations, petitions, and communications. This portion of the city council meeting is reserved for persons who desire to address the council. The Illinois Open Meetings Act mandates that the city council may not take action on comments received on matters that have not been identified on this agenda. But the council may direct staff to address the topic to refer the matter for action on the agenda for another meeting. Persons addressing the council are requested to limit their presentation to 3 minutes to avoid repetitious comments. We would also ask you state your name and address for the record as well as stand when speaking. Before anybody comes forward today, the first part of the meeting is where we're going to, any questions that you have before the presentations is now the time to do that. After the presentation starts, we're not going to take any questions from the audience. That meeting, when we have all the citizens together on July the 19th, is a special meeting for the public. We'll address those, and it'll be dedicated to the public. But on July the 19th, at the Burgess at 6:30, that's when the public gets to ask all their questions. The primary purpose of this meeting is to address questions from the council to get them up to speed on from the presentation. So is there anybody that would like to have an opportunity to ask any questions about any subject? Anybody offhand? Okay, we got anybody online?
Yeah, there's some people
Is there-
online, but
So is there anybody online that would like to ask any questions of the council? Okay, hearing none, we're going to go to the presentation part of this meeting. And we're going to start, I think, with Blake Pierce, Director of Finance from Rural King. Come up and say your name and who you're with and.
Sure, that's a good intro for my intro slide.
Okay, good.
I am Blake Pierce. I work at Rural King. I'm Director of Finance now, as previously real estate.
hit the space bar down. I got it right there where you can do it. Yep. If it works. I tried down arrow. Was working.
Jeff and I tested it, but.
We'll get it. I did.
Oh, did you get it or did I? I think I did it. I'll. Anyways, work at Rural King, and then I also serve as the chairman on the Sports Complex Plus Committee, which is one of the committees underneath Matching Motion. And then with Meg and Don Hansel, let him introduce himself.
Mayor Hall, members of the council, hello, John Hanson. I'm with IRR Corporate and Public Finance. We're part of Integra Realty Resources, a company nationwide, a little over 50 offices around the country, doing all types of real estate consultation. My particular group is located at 1901 West 47th Place in Westwood, Kansas. We lead the corporate and public finance group for the nationwide offices at Integra, and we've been engaged to be a financial consultant on the project, and I look forward to doing a portion of the presentation in just a few moments.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
And I think we have Rhonda Thomas on via teleconference. Rhonda, if you can hear us, would you mind introducing yourself and your firm a little bit?
Sure. My name is Rhonda Thomas. I'm a partner with the law firm of Thompson Coburn. Currently, my office is in Chicago. For many years, I worked in the St. Louis office. Started my career as a city attorney, but have spent most of my career working on public finance projects. Everything from economic development projects similar to this one to general obligation bonds and special revenue bonds for states and public entities, primarily in the Midwest. And
Great.
excited about this project. It's very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rhonda. Rhonda's not actually going to be presenting information, but we have her available if there's questions where we need to use her as a resource or have an attorney. Maybe that's something. Go to the next slide. So the purpose of today, and the mayor hit on it a little bit, but it's to provide a comprehensive briefing to the council in public setting. We've had several conversations over the last several months with individuals and different information shared with the community. We're going to be presenting today from the viewpoint that despite those conversations, nobody's really heard anything yet, and assuming no one really knows anything. So some of it's a little remedial, just bear with us. At the end, we're going to present the formal recommendation from our Sports Complex Plus Committee. That's what they've been working on. And then our goal would be to start the process to provide these presentations for the ultimate consideration and vote of the council before it would be required at that time at a future meeting. Next. So first off, a little bit of history about the sports complex project and the idea itself. It first was conceptualized a little over 3 years ago when we were at a real estate trade show and meeting with someone kind of in between meetings making small talk, and they had a binder and had a layout of the sports complex on. I said, hey, what are you working on? And the guy was a developer, and he said, actually one of the easiest development projects we've ever done. One of these complexes went in and it brought a bunch of retail and development to an area that otherwise was lacking or struggling to get it. And it took us about later that night that we said, after Royal King had purchased the mall and we've been trying to recruit tenants and people to town, so maybe this could be an opportunity to try to move the needle and assist in the development of the community. So started working with a firm, and it took some time to get going, but we found the SF companies the following summer after we had visited another community we started working for. The SF companies, they do 3 phases as it relates to sports complex. They do advisory services, helping market opportunity reports, and does it make sense to do this in a certain place, and what should you have, what could it support. They do development and assisting with actually building facilities, and then they do management of actually running these facilities. And so they operate about 25 to 30 of these across the country today. Some name brand ones like Myrtle Beach, Panama City, Cedar Point, and then some other ones, Branson, or other places maybe you haven't heard of as much. And we worked on those we engaged them to do market opportunity reports, gave us pains of cost and initial pro formas. And that was kind of in the fall of 2020 to spring of 21. So they got that and they said, we think you need X in a number of fields and inventories and things based upon youth participation rates within the commuting distance that these support. And these levels of travel sports, typically people are traveling from up to 5 hours away. And so we happen to be located in an area that's geographically beneficial to a lot of large metropolitan areas, Chicago, St. Louis, Cincinnati, Louisville, that we all would come to tournaments in this area. So we then said, great, what does that cost and how might you pay for it, how might it lay out? So we started working on some initial funding models and site plans back in May of 21. And we first said, okay, we think there's enough of an opportunity here that this should move from just being a Rural King idea to more of a community project. But we didn't want to progress any further down path if we thought it'd be I'll say heck no. And so we got a hold of some city officials and we said, is this idea worth working on? And they said, we think it's worth working on. Obviously, we got to answer a lot more questions, but let's find out more information. So we did that, and we wanted to get the community involved. So that's when in October of last year, we had a public announcement and said, hey, this is an opportunity we think exists for Mattoon. There's a lot of questions to be answered, but wanted to make the public aware of the project and get additional folks involved. That's when we created our Mattoon Sports Complex Plus Committee. Underneath Mattoon Motion was established. There's 11 individuals on that representing various businesses and organizations throughout the community. I've really been working since November with John's firm and a couple other professionals I'll talk about here in a minute to get all the nuts and bolts of what is the exact model, how does it get paid for, what's the structure, working on design, what would the planning of actually implementing this be, to get us to a point that we felt like we had a good enough plan that as a committee, we could say we think this is a path forward. And so for 6 months, we've been working on that to be able to come up with what we think is a viable path to implementing the project, what brings us here today. So some of those other parties involved to talk about sports facilities companies. Applied Economics is a firm that we engaged to study what are the benefits outside of the sports complex to the rest of the community, and we'll hit on those in the presentation. There's a large piece of this that is very dependent upon commercial development. And so we have a firm, Goodman Real Estate. The real estate brokers work nationwide and worked with them for years at Rural King. They're assisting us with recruiting and attracting and developing the commercial aspect of this project, and we've got really good traction with that so far. NextSite is a data company that can look at data analytics and cell phone data and assist us to be able to leverage some of our data metrics as we try to recruit additional folks. You know, for instance, the Matching Walmart has more visitors per year than Champaign Walmart. Well, people would be surprised to know that. Using that information as we try to attract people, that this is a regional attraction when there's things to attract people here. Agency Consulting Services, they help us with commercial layouts as we're coming up with different design patterns. Los Design has been assisting with the design of the actual facility itself. And then Vernon Jones is the same firm that did the high school turf installation, and they've done some, giving us some second opinions on costs and potential bids to make sure that what we got from the SF company is kind of a sanity check from a real life company that does these installations if we're kind of in range. Some of the major highlights of the development itself, it's 150 acres of total development, sports and the potential commercial side. It would have indoor and outdoor sports components to it. We're going to get into a lot more details on all these things as we go on. It'd be mixed use development on the commercial side, meaning additional hotels, restaurants, big box retail, small shops. Projected to bring at maturity, which they define as year 4, about 580,000 visitors to our community annually, which would result in $24 million direct spend from those visitors. And because of them coming primarily on the weekends, would require an additional 59,000 hotel rooms annually that we would need. So actually, even with our new hotel development going on, we will need additional hotels to support these developments. So this is one of the renderings of a potential complex that orients where this is located, what we're talking about. So across the top of the
Can you
slide.
point that, can we have an arrow to kind of show people on the screen if they can't see this?
Sure. So you have Charleston Avenue around 16 across the top, and then I-57 along the right side of the page. Home Depot is the black roof that's there, and currently where you see everything else is farm ground. So what's proposed is in the top right corner would be primarily the commercial development side. So as a proposed strip center for retail, along with outlots around the perimeter, which to be utilized for restaurants or hotel. On the left side, the large box, it would be the indoor sports facility. We'll talk more in a minute. In front of it are two renderings of a couple potential hotels that could be there. And then it has inventory of soccer fields, and then the baseball fields, softball fields along the right. I'll talk more detail about that. Let's go next. So the actual sports assets of the project, before baseball / softball / multi-purpose fields, turf that are 300 feet, 4 baseball, softball, multi-purpose that are 400 feet, and then 8 soccer fields in total. Half would be turf, half would be grass. Both the 300-foot, 400-foot, and the soccer field would have a championship field that would have a little bit extra seating, maybe nicer scoreboards that could serve as where championship games are held and potentially collegiate level competitions if they're held here. There will be a walking / bike path throughout the whole facility that we want to connect across Route 16 to the bike path that goes between Matching and Charleston, the Lincoln Prairie path. And then the indoor facility itself is about 140,000 square feet. It would hold 8 basketball courts, which when you divide them in half for volleyball is 16 volleyball courts. Have collegiate level locker rooms to be able to host college level tournaments. Family entertainment center that'd be open not only on the weekends but during the week for local kids to throw parties or birthday parties, things like that. A medical tenant space that we're working on, having a medical aspect to the project, and then seating, tractable seating that could hold about 3,000 people for large events or large tournaments or large games itself. The commercial development I kind of already hit on a little bit out of order, but this just zooms in a little bit more as we're speaking to what might be some restaurant, hotels, and retail. And we've been marketing this part of the project since January, trying to convince retailers and restaurant groups. And we've started to get a lot of traction with that, actually. We probably have 5 or 6 what we call letters of intent already going back and forth negotiating deals if the sports complex will go through. There is also a, you see within the cost estimates, there's an aspect of public infrastructure. So we'll talk about costs of the sports assets. If you see that yellow line that kind of goes around the sports facilities, that's what's referring to when it talks about the cost of the sports complex. So the parking, the fields related to that. There is some public infrastructure needed to get to it. So that's what's outlined in orange here. And you'll see within our budgets accounted for about $4 million that we need in order to connect to the sports assets themselves. And with that, I'm going to transition to John for presentation.
Great. Thank you, Blake. And again, Mayor Hall, members of the council, thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you this morning. I think that we get the pleasure to work with communities, large and small, on a variety of projects, mixed-use projects, retail projects, some with sports facilities like the one being contemplated for this project. As I mentioned, our group within Integra Realty Resources is located in Kansas City, but we serve nationwide. So we get the benefit of seeing projects in many different jurisdictions, many different types of projects, and we get to utilize a whole host of strategies. And so we brought what we believe to be a very creative approach to the financial summary that we'll provide to you today. We look forward to rolling it out. As we were engaged on this project, we really had a specific mandate, and that was to develop a financial strategy that would allow the project to be financed, of course, but also to minimize the risk to all the stakeholders involved. And we believe firmly, as a philosophy in our firm, that a project has to work for all groups involved: private parties, public parties, landowners, developers, tenants, the municipalities, the taxing jurisdictions involved. It needs to work in a balanced fashion in order for the project to be successful. We find that if projects are misbalanced, favor one party over another, in many projects around the country, we find that those projects generally don't move forward. So we've been looking for a way to minimize risk to the parties involved, but also to find a financiable solution. So today, I'm going to review a summary of the recommended financing plan for the project, and I hope to answer the 2 following important questions that I imagine, if I were a member of the council, I would want to know. And that is, what is the exposure? What exposure does the city face by agreeing to this financing plan for this project? And number 2, what benefits are the city estimated to receive by agreeing to the finance plan? And I hope to be able to answer both of those questions very clearly over the next few slides. So first, you saw an image just like this in Blake's presentation, but this pans out a little bit further, and I want to talk just about some of the terminology that I'm going to use as I walk through the financing plan, so we're all on the same page. There's 3 areas outlined in this particular graphic. Number 1 is what we call the adjacent commercial development. It's outlined in red. It includes Home Depot and other existing restaurants, retailers, hotels in the area. It is owned by a variety of different private ownerships. Some investors who lease their projects, some user-occupied locations, et cetera. But those are primarily private-owned existing commercial development today. Second is the new commercial development. Blake touched on that, what the vision for that new commercial development is. That's land that's owned by an affiliate of Rural King, and it's planned to be developed by the Rural King team based on the letters of interest that they referenced. It will include retail, restaurants, hotels, things of that nature. The third group is the sports facility, outlined in blue, and that Blake talked about, that includes the indoor facility, outdoor facility, parking, green space, all of those components. So those are the 3 areas that I'm going to be covering over the next little bit. The next slide I'd like to talk about is what we're proposing for the ownership of the sports facility itself. So the blue area that was outlined in that previous slide. So what we're proposing is that the sports facility be owned by the Mattoon Sports Complex Corporation. That is a newly formed Illinois nonprofit corporation. And that corporation will seek qualification as a 501c3 nonprofit with the IRS. That process takes a little time. The purpose of that corporation is to obtain financing for, construct, own, and operate the sports facility. So it removes the ownership to a separate entity away from any of the public taxing jurisdictions or any particular private ownership and put it into a newly formed nonprofit corporation. That nonprofit corporation, MSC Corporation for short, will be governed by a board of directors represented by a broad representation of the Mattoon community. That hasn't been specifically decided yet, but that's the goal of that corporation. And the facility itself, while the board of directors would likely be a volunteer board of directors to govern the ownership of that facility, the actual facility management itself would be managed by a top-tier sports facility management company that is selected by the board of that corporation. Now, because a nonprofit corporation that gets formed takes several months, typically we've heard a range of 6 to 9 months type of range. And based on today's day and age of COVID and inavailability and things like that, typically on the longer end of that spectrum, to get a 501c3 determination letter from the IRS, we are evaluating and seeking an interim entity to serve these functions of ownership, financing, things of that nature, until this new corporation can be formed and put into place, at which time responsibilities would all transfer over to MSC Corporation. So that's the overall ownership structure that's been envisioned for the project. And I would say, as I continue on, Council, I know there questions will pop into your mind as we move along in the presentation. I welcome your clarifications as we go along. So please don't hesitate. As we talk about the project budget, first, we have the project for the sports facility delineated into 3 primary components. Number one, the indoor sports and events facility is approximately $25 million. That includes multiple components, as you can see delineated here: site work, FF&E, soft costs, and contingency for cost increases, as well as we know that's important in today's day and age. The outdoor sports facility, additionally delineated in a similar fashion, has a total cost of approximately $37 million. Rounding out the costs for the sports facility are the required infrastructure improvements that were on the slide that Blake shared that were highlighted in orange, primarily road infrastructure improvements in the amount of $4 million. So the $25 million indoor facility, $37 million outdoor facility, and $4 million infrastructure cost brings the total sports facility project to approximately $66 million. Next slide, please. So how are we proposing to fund?
Real quick, that 66 million was based, it's going on 2 years old data, is that correct?
It's been updated a little bit more recently than that. SF began their work 2 years ago, and they have looked at that a little bit more recently. It's probably about 12 months old now.
It mirrors what was presented September, or the numbers for September of 2020. So my question is, do we need to adjust those higher?
Sure. So as we proceed forward into design of the indoor and outdoor facility, we'll spend more time refining those numbers. We won't take a step forward in a phase of this project until we have clearly delineated guaranteed maximum price contracts for the facilities to build. And we'll ensure that the capital stack, as I refer to it, or the sources and uses of funds for the project for each phase as we undertake it, will ensure that we have sufficient funds identified for a guaranteed maximum price for the project. So while we don't know today whether the project will be precisely 66 million or a number that could be lower or higher than that, you have our commitment, and all of the stakeholders involved, bondholders, banks, all parties involved will want to ensure that there are sufficient funds available to build that phase of the project before we get started with that phase. So how do we propose, assuming the $66 million number, which has a healthy contingency in it of approximately 10%, how do we propose to fund that? And do it in a way that minimizes risks, as I mentioned earlier. So our first source of funds are estimated donations of $10 million. That is the goal that the Sports Plus Committee is currently undertaking, raising $10 million from donors within the community that are interested in the success of the community and the success of this facility. So $10 million will be sourced from private donations. We expect the $4 million in offsite infrastructure to qualify for a number of grants. So we have specific members of the team pursuing those grants to fund the public infrastructure of the project to the tune of $4 million. The third component is bank loan. The indoor and outdoor sports facilities will both, they're both projected to produce positive net income as a result of their operations, as shown in sports facility companies' income and expense projections for the project. We believe that a bank or multiple banks would be interested in providing a bank loan to help fund a portion of the project with a portion of that net income pledged to repay that bank loan. We've sized that bank loan at approximately $10 million, just a little bit over at $10.4 million. And we think that's a feasible portion of the capital stack. The final piece that I'm going to spend several slides talking about is a public finance piece that we expect to be completed by the issuance of multiple series of bonds for the project. I'll explain the revenues that go into those bonds, the details surrounding those bonds, but that public finance category of $49.4 million are public finance bonds for the project. That is the projected capacity that if the entire project were built, the new commercial development, the sports facility, we project that the public finance structure would produce bonds of $49.4 million. If they do, they provide all total, all of those sources, provide $7.7 million more than what we project to spend. So to your point, Councilmember Phipps, if costs were to increase even up to $7.7 million higher than what we're projecting here, we would have sufficient capacity available to fund that project. The uses are just highlighted here, summarized again, same as the uses from the prior, just more highly summarized. But to gain familiarity with everyone, indoor 25 million, outdoor 37, structure 4 for a total of 66. Next slide, please. So I'd like to focus on the next few slides on what do I mean by public finance and what do I mean by bond issue? How would that work? What would debt service those bonds? So we're taking a multiple layer approach, and we found across the country in projects of this nature that it often takes more than one tool. TIF is a good tool. It can be used for many things, but oftentimes special districts need to be included as well. Other types of rebates, sales tax exemptions on materials. There's a whole host of public finance tools that exist out in the marketplace. We looked at as many as we could think of as we were looking at this project and designing the public finance and the financial structure here. And we've settled on 5 particular tools that we think would work very well together. The first one of those is an intergovernmental agreement to redirect the property tax increase from the land that currently is undeveloped farm ground and will become the new commercial development and sports facility. We would redirect the property tax increase from that as a result of the development for up to 30 years. The lesser of 30 years or the time in which it takes to repay the bonds. That would be tool number 1. It functions similar to tax increment finance, but it's not exactly the same. It would be an intergovernmental agreement of the major taxing jurisdictions. We hope to include the city, county, the school district, and Lakeland College. in that intergovernmental agreement and gain agreement from each one of those parties to rebate their property tax increase from the project. The second tool that's being proposed is a city sales tax rebate. So the city has a 1.5% sales tax rate. We would propose that rebate be rebated for the new commercial development and any sales tax that's created on the sports facility itself, that incremental sales tax be rebated back to the benefit of the project. The third tool would be the rebate of hotel occupancy tax in the amount of 5% for any of the new hotels and the new commercial development. We would propose that for all the visitors being generated to be brought to the area by the sports complex and filling up those hotels, that the hotel occupancy tax from those new hotels be rebated back to help finance the project. Fourth tool would be a private fee. We've used this in a number of contexts in Colorado, in Kansas, Florida, and other states where we implement a private fee on sales. That's implemented by covenant, a declaration on the land. It requires the retailers within the new commercial development to charge an extra 2% fee. That would create an additional revenue stream that would help to finance these bonds. And again, that would be up to 30 years as well. The final component is a business district, and I've got the map back up here just to explain the boundaries. The four prior tools that I just described, intergovernmental agreement, sales tax rebate, hotel occupancy tax, and the private fee, would be on the blue and yellow areas alone. So the sports facility and the new commercial development. We propose to do a business district on all three of these areas, including the sports facility and new commercial development, but also adding in the adjacent commercial development as well. That adjacent commercial development today does not have a business district surrounding it. So we would propose a business district over all three of these areas that would encompass the outer boundary shown. The business district would be comprised of two components: a 1% sales tax that would be applicable per state statute to very specific sales taxable items within the business district, but would be applied over all three of those areas, again, for a term of 23 years. 23 years is the statutory maximum allowed for a business district, unless it is extended in the future. Then we would also impose a business district hotel tax on the hotels within all three areas. That would add a 1% add-on tax to the hotels. Any questions on those items?
John, I might ask a question on the 1% sales tax. Now, most of this comes from new development, the revenue from new development, but there are some that are impacted that exist now. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the retailers within that red area, the adjacent commercial development, we would propose that the business district would encompass them as well.
Now, is that on all sales? What sales are excluded there?
So there are multiple sales categories that are excluded. The most notable ones are grocery, fuel, pharmaceuticals, things of that nature. There's a more comprehensive list, but those are the largest ones that would be excluded from application of a business district tax.
Okay, so again, groceries, gasoline, all that stays the same.
Correct.
Okay.
That's right.
That would also put that area on the same playing field that we have other business district areas that are at the 1% higher now.
Exactly.
So it puts pretty much the entire city at a level playing field on businesses.
That's right. It does level the playing field area of the city.
John, I have a question. If I understand this right, the current 1.5% sales tax that the city generates would be rebated. We would rebate that to the project in addition to the proposed 1% in the business district.
That's correct, but there's one clarification of that. That rebate would not happen for the red area, the existing commercial.
Okay.
That rebate would only happen for the yellow and blue areas on the map. The new
Okay.
commercial development that doesn't exist today and the sports facility. So there wouldn't be a degradation of revenues to the city from things that are already producing sales
Because I
tax.
think that existing area brings in about 150 million in annual revenue, of which we get that 1.5.
Yeah,
I see.
I think that's approximately correct. I think the business district eligible sales within that area are a bit less than that, closer to the
Okay.
$100 million range. But yes, that's my understanding as well.
Thank you.
This is a slightly different way of looking at the projected sources for the project. I like to, you'll notice some reiteration of this information, but that's intentional to try to show it in different ways. I know different folks respond to graphs better than words, better than charts. So this is a projected source of funds by category for the entire project, $66 million project. Donations, again, $10 million would represent about 14% of the expected sources available. Grants of $4 million would be about 5%. Bank loans of $10 million, again, 14% for the project. And the balance, the public finance tools from the 5 different revenue streams that we just reviewed would create capacity of about $49 million, or about 67%. And all told, those revenues altogether create approximately $7.7 million of additional capacity to accommodate scope increases, cost increases, things of that nature, to allow the project to be successful. So I'd like to shift and talk just a little bit more in detail about the revenue bond structure. I imagine you may have some questions about that. So let me walk through this. I know this slide's a little wordy, but I think these words are important to help illustrate how it reduces the risk of all parties involved. Number one, we expect the bonds to be what are called revenue bonds, not general obligation bonds, but bonds that are only debt service based on the revenue that's being pledged to them. They would be fixed interest rate bonds. They would be long-term, which would assure us that financing is available in the long term for the facility. They would be non-rated bonds, so they would not have any credit enhancement from the city, any taxing jurisdiction, or any private entity. They would be solely non-rated bonds based on the estimated revenues from this facility and the revenue streams that we just outlined, the 5 revenue streams. And they would be non-recourse bonds, meaning that if bondholders are short of their projected debt service, either interest or principal payments, those bondholders have no ability to have recourse back to the facility, the MSC Corporation, the city, the county, the school, Lakeland College, or any other private entity in the overall project. So that's a very important feature. They would be issued by an issuer that is yet to be determined. We've identified, in support with your legal counsel, a couple of potential options for issuers within the state of Illinois. Our firm has also worked with national bond issuers that have the ability to issue bonds anywhere in the country, tax exempt municipal bonds anywhere in the country. So we have multiple options. We have not selected who the issuer is going to be yet. But what we do know is that the city of Mattoon is not going to be the issuer of these bonds. That's been made clear through this process that we need to come up with a different solution other than the city of Mattoon. That's part of the risk mitigation for the city, is to be removed from the issuance of these bonds. And we think that can be done. It's done all the time where other conduit issuers are used for projects. So while we haven't pinned down who the issuer is, I can assure you it will not be the city of Mattoon.
John, who buys these bonds? Who, like community people, explain that a little bit.
So in any event, these are going to be very sophisticated investors, high net worth or institutional investors for these bonds. These are going to be very sophisticated parties that are accustomed to buying municipal bonds and will be very well versed on the risks associated with what it is that they're purchasing, understanding the bond issue, the revenues to be pledged, That will all be delineated in what's called a disclosure document, which is often called an official statement for the bond issue. Those bondholders will be sophisticated. Typically, they are large bond managers like Nuveen, Oppenheimer, and others, Goldman Sachs, large asset management firms, life insurance companies, things of that nature.
But if someone around here wanted to buy, they could go through those firms and buy, I mean, how, or is it unlikely anybody would, in this room would buy those bonds?
It would be unlikely.
Yeah.
Typically, these are large, either Wall Street or other large institutional buyers located around the country.
So because these are long-term bonds, are they impacted by the changes? I mean, we've had property residential mortgage rates go up and down and crazy things right now. Does that same thing happen to these bonds? And what are the bond rates that we're estimating now?
So leading up to the issuance of the bond, yes, we'll need to keep a close eye on where interest rates have moved. Over the last 3 or 4 months, interest rates have easily moved 1.5% higher over that period of time. However, once we sell these bonds, the interest rate at that point is locked in from the project's perspective. The bond funds are made available, and then it's the bondholder's risk, whether future interest rates go up and the value of their bonds go down.
Okay, so, but if the bond rates are high right now and they don't drop, let's say, can these bonds be refinanced? Can you get a lower rate? Explain that.
Typically, so the interest rate that we're projecting now for these bonds is 6 and 6.25% on a tax exempt basis. Typically, bond investors in these types of bonds will have what's called a call protection period in which you can't refinance the bonds, typically from 5 to 10 years. In that time, we will not be able to refinance those bonds, but once we go past that time period, we will be able to refinance and potentially either shorten the time period in which those bonds take to repay or make funds available for capital improvements or what have you.
No, I'm saying for you open the term, it's major. Yeah.
You want me to say something about that?
Yeah.
Excuse someone on the, that's on
I'm calling.
the call needs to mute your device, whether it be a computer or phone. We're hearing you talk in the background.
Mayor, did I answer your
Yeah,
question?
yes, you did, yes.
So the debt service on the bonds, I'm on the third bullet point on this slide. The debt service on the bonds will be solely from the public finance revenues pledged as I previously outlined. So those 5 components: the intergovernmental agreement, sales tax rebate, hotel tax rebate, private fee, and business district revenue. That will be the sole source of revenue to repay these bonds. And we believe that there are already bond buyers out there that are purchasing bonds like this for other projects in other communities around the country. We believe this will still be an attractive component, but they will note that there is a risk that the project doesn't perform as well as projected, and that there is a risk that a portion of their interest and or principal might not be repaid. So in order to mitigate that risk, there will be some safeguards put into place. These are typical of revenue bonds of this type, but I've outlined some of what those safeguards will be in this bullet point. They could be debt service reserve funds, capitalized interest, what's called a debt coverage ratio, meaning for every dollar of projected revenues, bondholders are only going to assume that a fraction of that is actually received, and that gives them a margin of interest. It's fundamentally no different than a bank giving you a difference between a home that you purchased and a loan to value on that home of 80% or 90%. So those safeguards will be put in place. That will make the bond attractive to the bond buyers. But again, they hold the risk that those bonds do not perform. That is not a risk that's borne by any public entity or any private entity involved in the project. So, and Mayor, you asked the question, but I'll cover this in my bullet point that I prepared here. The bondholders will be sophisticated investors. They're capable of understanding the risks associated with a non-rated, non-recourse bond. They'll sign a bond purchase agreement that says they are sophisticated and self-certified, that they meet certain requirements, and that they understand that there's a risk of loss of their investment. So that will all be very, very clear when we go to issue these bonds. Any questions on the bond structure? Great. Let me talk about a few other nuances with respect to the financing plan. So we believe, where we stand today, that it's likely that we would undertake this facility in 2 likely phases. Phase number 1 is outlined on the left and includes the indoor sports facility. We hope to have the indoor sports facility open as early as October of next year. And phase 2, the outdoor fields, as Mr. Pierce outlined, the multi-purpose fields, baseball fields, soccer fields, the associated parking with phase 2, we would expect to come a little bit behind that and be open in the spring of 2024. Next slide, please. Phase 1, this is a conceptual rendering. I'm sure many of you have seen this image or a similar one. Next slide, please. So the approach for phase 1, in order to get the project started as soon as possible. Again, just as a recap, the cost of the indoor facility is $25 million. The infrastructure is $4 million. Pardon my repetition on that. But the financing of phase 1 would include the following components. We would try to line out the $10 million of donations. So that's the total amount of donations for the whole facility. We think a portion of the bank loan would be available for the indoor facility. The indoor facility is projected to produce 70% of the net income available to the project. And so approximately 70% of the $10 million bank loan would be available in phase 1. The $4 million grants for the infrastructure would be put in place. And then a $10.5 million net proceed bond issue would be undertaken to help us round out all the sources necessary to build this phase 1. The $10.5 million in bond proceeds, we think, once the business district is put in place and overlaid the existing commercial retail, we think there are sufficient sales, as Commissioner Clausen mentioned, from that adjacent retail that exists today. Sufficient bond proceeds would be made available in the amount of $10.5 million. And that would provide enough, plus a little bit of a margin for error, for us to be able to build the indoor facility and start on that project right away. So many steps to be put in place, put all public finance components in place. This is just the start of this process. This is an information session to begin the education and to gain, for you all to gain a comfort level and for us to talk to other taxing jurisdictions about this. But upon implementation of all those components and the business district, we would be ready to commence phase 1, even before the commitments for the new commercial, as Blake and others on the Rural King team are working on, before those commitments are solidified. So that's important. We have a path forward relatively quickly to start this project, and we're excited about that. Next slide, please. So again, these are the project areas of the project, and just to reiterate, while we will put a business district across all 3 of these, there won't be a lot of credit given to us from bondholders about the yellow new commercial development until we can come to them and say, not only do we have letters of interest on this space, but we have binding purchase agreements for outlots. We have binding leases for new national restaurants and retailers to come into the area. We have binding PSAs or leases with hotel groups to come in and build the new hotels. So again, the business district financing associated with red will be immediately available upon the creation of the business district. The availability of bond proceeds and credit for the yellow and blue areas will take time as those are committed and as they move forward. Next slide, please. Phase 2 then would come as soon as it possibly can. The faster we can get new commercial commitments, the faster we can commence phase 2. Our hope is that before phase 1 is even open, we're doing a phase 2 financing, beginning that right on the table, or laughing with phase 1. But time will tell. The pace of those commercial developments will dictate the speed at which we can do phase two. These are some conceptual images of phase two that you may have seen, not our particular facility, but pictures and images that sports facilities companies and others have shown us. Again, the outdoor sports facility, so phase two would be $37 million. The infrastructure is already in place. The indoor facility is already financed and moving forward. Then we move to the outdoor facility, cost is $37 million. The way that we would finance that $37 million is through two components: additional bank loans. So the net income off the outdoor facility would service more bank loan debt, allow us to get approximately $3.2 million of additional bank loan financing. And then we would go issue another series of bonds based on the new commercial development commitments in the amount, at full commitment of that new commercial development, $38.9 million. And that would give us a surplus of about $5.1 million, again, to weather cost increases and other interest rate increases, things of that nature. So that's how we would plan to finance phase one and phase two, if necessary independently, but hopefully as soon as possible.
John, what's the total debt service on the 49 million that we're going to bond? Anticipated bond.
I don't have that in front of me right now. You have our full financial analysis in front of you. There's going to be some of that information. I can follow up with that. Traditionally, on a bond of this nature, interest would roughly approximate over the life, approximate the principal. So the total debt service is probably something close to twice as much as the amount of bond issue that you're.
So I guess my question is, what's our annual debt service on this thing?
Annual debt service would be for $49 million worth of bonds. The total amount would be about $5 million per year, approximately. But I can follow up with the detailed analysis with respect to that. The economic benefits for the project, I think it's important as we talk about, we've talked about how we have mitigated the risk to the parties. We talked about the revenue bonds. No one's guaranteeing, there's no recourse on those. So we've touched on that. But now I want to shift and talk about the economic benefits. What's in it for the city? What's in it for other tax jurisdictions, the community at large, for considering a project like this? And I think there are some very significant benefits to talk about and bring to your attention. But I think it's important as we talk about what those benefits are, I think it's also important to know what is currently being generated from the land area that is farm ground today that will become the sports facility and the new commercial development if you all choose to move forward. That property tax today is a little less on an annual basis, a little less than $7,500 per year on that farm ground. $1,700 to the city of Mattoon specifically, delineated the other major taxing jurisdictions as well. We want to take that and multiply it by many, many times. Next slide, please. The economic benefits for the project can be grouped into three main categories. Applied economics touched on all three, and then my firm, IRR Corporate and Public Finance, added an additional component, the direct tax revenue benefit, item number 3. So we'll talk about each of those: job creation, the overall economic impacts to the project, and then what are the specific tax revenue impacts expected to each of the major taxing jurisdictions. First, job creation. We expect a little over 1,152 permanent jobs to be created from this project as outlined on the image on the left, the new commercial and sports facility. Those would be a combination. They're outlined in the applied economics study in more detail, summarized here. But those would be the direct, indirect, and induced jobs of the project, with approximately 700 being new on-site jobs and approximately 450 being new off-site jobs. Let me touch on the nomenclature of direct, indirect, and induced. I know those aren't terms that are typically utilized, but it's important with these economic studies to understand the terminology. Direct is, as you can imagine, the specific project itself, the sports facility and the new commercial development. Individuals that are going to come to work at those facilities or immediately support the people that are at those facilities. Those are going to be the new jobs on site for the project. The indirect jobs are businesses that support businesses. Every business that gets created has a need for services. They have a need for cleaning services, maintenance services, landscaping services. The list could go on and on. But every business requires other businesses to support it. And so indirect jobs are jobs that support those direct businesses. And then induced jobs come from the fact that the direct and indirect businesses that are supporting this project each employ people. Those people enjoy salaries, which then helps create their household income and their household expenditures. And so the 1,152 permanent jobs are a combination of on-site, off-site, and sum total direct, indirect, and induced. The study by Applied Economics that you have in front of you goes into much more detail about that terminology. So I welcome questions about it or taking a look at more depth in that study. In addition to the permanent jobs, 1,660 construction jobs are estimated for the project. These would be temporary, associated with the construction of the facility itself. Both the commercial and the sports facility and include direct and indirect temporary jobs. Next slide, please. The economic impacts for the project, according to the Applied Economics study, over a 30-year period of $3.3 billion, including $110.5 million of economic impact to the city of Mattoon from the project on an annual basis. $54 million on-site, $56 million off-site. Applied Economics uses some tried and true economic multiplier measures that are well used out in the economics field to derive these estimates. Construction impacts for the entire project would be $194 million. That's the $66 million of the sports facility itself, but then another sizable $125 million or so in the commercial facility itself as well. And annual visitors within the project are also benefits for the project. The tax revenue impact. So it's one thing to talk about economic impacts, but it's another thing to talk about what does that boil down to actual tax revenue that's projected for each of the taxing jurisdictions. The city of Mattoon is expected over a 30-year period to enjoy $39 million of new revenues. Coles County, 13.5, Lakeland College, 2.2, and Mattoon School District number 2, $27.6 million for a grand total tax revenue impact of $82.3 million to each of to the sum total of those tax jurisdictions. Next slide. So that's a summary of the economic benefits. I've also touched on a summary of the financial plan as well. So back to the two questions that I posed at the beginning of my presentation. What exposure does the city face as a result of saying yes to this project? This isn't a comprehensive list, but I think it is one that hits the highlights. First of all, the city is not exposed by ownership of this facility. A separate nonprofit ownership would be created. They would not be the issuer of these bonds. Even if they were the issuer, they would still be revenue bonds without recourse back to the issuer. But picking a different issuer provides another layer of removal for the city, protection for the city. And importantly, there would be no guarantee by the city or of any additional revenues to the bonds other than transferring the pledged revenues that we've talked about. No additional risk to the general fund of the city or any other resource or property of the city. Nor would any other party be guaranteeing it, important as well. So that would be a risk of the bondholders, as we talked about. And then what are the benefits that the city receives? You receive a community facility that I believe you could be very proud of, an amenity that would be renowned in the region for its ability to host regional and local sports events, including other events in the event center as well. $39 million in direct tax benefit over 30 years, 695 permanent jobs on site, and over $110 million in annual economic impact. Next slide, please. So the recommended next steps, Mayor Hall touched on this, would be a city council meeting on July 19th to allow for this information and any other information that we think should be shared in that meeting to be shared in a broader, this is of course a public forum, but to specifically give the public a chance to ask questions and provide comments of the council in that setting. So again, another open meeting July 19th. And then we would hope that the council could be ready sometime in August to consider a formal resolution of intent with respect to the steps necessary to move forward. This, again, would not be the definitive documents associated, but it would be an indication of the council's intent to move forward with the structuring, with working out more of the details, et cetera. And hopefully, sometime in August, I'll vote on that resolution of intent to give the committee, all those involved working in the project, clear direction, a thumbs up that we're headed in the right direction. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Blake to summarize the recommendation of the Sport Plus Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, John. A lot of information. You can understand why it took 6 or 7 months to figure out exactly what it was that was going to be presented as a path forward. So I think his firm and all the other professionals that have gone into a lot of hard work, a lot of hours, and up with this building and saying today. I encourage you, if you'll have a lot of information shared with you from John, another supportive information to review between now and any time the potential vote will take place. But please review the information. Please reach out, questions, in any manner that you like that we might be able to assist them. So we took John's information and pretty much put together a formal document that I think if it hasn't been shared with you will be soon. That is what the committee voted on as our kind of recommended course of action. Again, this committee is not a aspect of the city. It works in conjunction with the city of Mattoon, but it's underneath Mattoon's motion. Our committee recommends, as he pretty much outlined, to construct an indoor and outdoor sports facility designed to maximize long-term visitors to our area and enable and encourage additional associated commercial development for the betterment of our community. The structure, as John touched on, would be a new not-for-profit entity to own the assets. Rural King would be donating the grounds for the sports assets to this entity, and then would oversee the commercial development on the front side of the project. The sports assets themselves, I won't review again, but I will note that we put in a recommendation that all assets should be constructed to allow for seamless integration to adjacent commercial properties and provide enough parking to utilize all sports assets concurrently. And a positive visitor experience is paramount and should have the utmost consideration in design and operation to ensure repeat visitors. Total footprint would be owned by the new co, which is about 110 acres. We want this to be a destination where people come and they want to keep coming back to. Some other sports facilities that exist, people don't have a great experience and they don't come back. So we got to be thinking of visitors and kind of customer experience at the forefront of construction throughout all of its design. The funding piece would be in accordance with John's recommendations. It would be broken into 2 phases as he kind of broke out. And in the interim, we have been ongoing. I'm working on raising $2 million that we need on the private portion of the funding. We've raised about 30% of that so far in commitments and are actively working on that number of subcommittee of that group. The timing, we recommend to follow the timing that was outlined. We'd like to have that meeting in July for the community to make comments on, and we'd like to see action taken in August. If that's able to take place, we believe we could break ground in first quarter of 2023 on the indoor aspect of the project to be open a year after that. And then John summarized the benefits. Just to put in annual numbers, so those increased tax numbers for the jurisdictions, those were above and beyond anything contributed to the project. So on average, over a 30-year period, the city of Mattoon, because, for instance, sales at Walmart goes up 5% because you have all these visitors coming to town, that sales tax is a direct benefit to the city. So the city of Mattoon would look to see about a $1.3 million increase in revenue because this project is happening. The school district would see an average increase annual revenue of $900,000, and the county of about $430,000. So it has benefits. This investment pays dividends for years to come. And my hopes help solve some of our financial challenges that we have. And then the last piece, the ongoing consideration, I think Commissioner Phipps pointed out that there's a lot of numbers that are still moving this project. John mentioned how they have to be reviewed, updated, but we can't, without doing full design, we can't go get hard bids, and those have to be completed before you do bonds. So there's a strong recommendation in this committee that every step of the project be continually evaluated for any changes of the underlying assumptions, and that no construction of sports assets commence without absolute assurance of funding, that the sports complex can be viable for a very long term. A lot of areas for public projects just focus on getting it built. We've taken a lot of care to have a plan for it not only to be successful the day it opens, but to be successful for a very long time. So with that, I think is all the items we had within our presentation. I will give any additional questions.
Yeah, just a couple of things. Of course, everybody knows that we're not voting on anything today. We are talking about a resolution that we would vote on sometime in August. But even that resolution does not commit us to go forward yet. That resolution permits us to do additional steps that if they are successful, we go through and approve those sort of as we go. A final approval is not done until we know about the business district tax, what we know about the bond sales, what we know about the actual cost of the project. There's a lot of steps that still have to be approved. But to take those next steps at a meeting in the month of August, sometime, we need to take that step in order to further investigate those items. There may be changes between now and the public meeting that we'll be able to share at that meeting, because we know we're going to get more commitments in donations. We suspect we're going to have updates on the business district, and things like that are going to occur sort of on a regular basis. But we're to the point now where we know enough about this project that we need to share this information with the council members. And of course, they may have more questions yet today. You know, we need to take each one of those steps as we go. This is not unique that's happening here in Mattoon. Anybody that's doing a complex like this, and everybody that's been on this has said, they're all different. But they have to go through all these steps in order to, you know, to succeed. So I don't know, other comments or questions that we have?
I have a couple, and first one's for John. The $4 million infrastructure number that you gave us, what kind of data did you use to come up with that, or Blake, whoever?
Yeah, we just did a average per square foot of road. I think we got some input from Dean and some others as to what on average does it cost per foot of road you might have to connect them. So that's a kind of a rounded number, but it's a recent, yes.
And I think you covered this as well. There would be no obligation by the city of Mattoon on the bank loans. Is that correct? Okay. And then my final question, I don't know if you can answer this. The 3 taxing bodies, the intergovernmental agreements, you pretty confident that we'll have those? That all 3 taxing bodies will buy into this project and rebate whatever property taxes or whatever they would be losing?
Yeah, so we've had conversations with members of the boards of those different taxing bodies. Nothing's been approved because we kind of have to go, as Mayor Hall pointed out, we have to take a step to then engage those parties officially in those agreements. Their groups have to go officially decide. We've had very positive initial conversations. I can say most are viewing the project as this is a development that without giving up the revenues of it, doesn't happen without. And so they don't view it on the new side, the new commercial side, that they're losing anything. They only stand to gain. I mean, this is how I think of it.
Okay. Thank you both.
Anybody else? Questions? That was a good time to Excuse me, yeah, go ahead, John.
I just wanted to clarify, and just to be able to answer Commissioner Pipp's question about debt service on the bonds, I was able to look into our financial analysis and the revenues associated with it. Commissioner Phipps, you asked on an annual basis, what would bond debt service be on the project? I mentioned about $5 million. The exact number is 4.8 from page 13 of our analysis. It's further important to know that bondholders will require a margin of error in that. And so the bonds would pay off if the debt service was $3.7 million per year. At $3.7 million, they'd pay off in 30 years. If the revenue is as projected, it's closer to 4.8, growing from there with inflation, then they would pay off early in approximately something like 23, 24, 25 years, something like that.
And you mentioned there's no recourse on the city, but there is recourse on that for the 4 million in revenue, or the revenue that's generated, the 1.5%, the 1%, the 2% fee, and the real estate tax.
The limitation of the responsibility is for those revenues that have been delineated to be sent to a trustee.
Right.
If the amounts of those monies are lower than 3.7 million, then the bondholders, they have a risk that perhaps they won't be repaid. But there is no further obligation to supplement those revenues with any other source of revenues. It's just an obligation to transfer those revenues as to.
In your initial study, there was 600,000 visitors anticipated, but the last slide showed 250.
So there's a discrepancy between the number of visitors that SF, Sports Facilities Companies, thinks, and what was put in the applied economics study. I think there's a discrepancy between what they estimate those annual visitorships to be. We noticed that as well as we were putting the presentation together, and we're going to go back and inquire with applied economics and talk about the data. Applied economics is not an expert necessarily on sports facilities themselves. They're an expert on how to quantify economic impacts of a whole variety of different types of projects. So we think that with additional information from sports facilities advisors, that it's likely they can provide information and insight into why they think the visitorship is closer to 600,000. So we're going to work to resolve that discrepancy. Thank you. We also saw that as well.
Pretty big discrepancy.
It is.
So the numbers and the projections you're using though are the 600,000. The not applied economics is 250.
The economic impact projections are based on the two benefits. So to the extent applied economics thinks that's too conservative after we talk to them about that discrepancy, those benefits may go up.
But the pro formas on the operation of the facilities, the indoor facility, and also the participation in the outdoor stuff.
Yes. So
That was based on the higher number.
the operation, the profitability of the indoor and outdoor facility is based on higher numbers.
And the higher number is what's used to back into what's going to be bonded.
That's more has to do with the bank loan. So if the facility was less profitable, a lower bank budget would be provided. The projections for the bonds are based on the economic revenues, more so of the commercial development than the sports facility itself.
Other questions people have? Those,
I do have a question for the main, it's probably more at the council level, but this is probably one of the largest, if not arguably the largest decision the council would have to make on the city of Mattoon in history. Is there a potential to just put it on a referendum in November?
I don't know the answer to that offhand, but we've never brought any economic projects, and we've done capital investment projects that are tens of millions of dollars, certainly, and sewer, water, we were elected to make certain decisions. And I don't know how everybody else feels, but if the public wanted to go through 500 pages of data and become experts like we've hired to provide this information for us, then I guess that's an option, but it also delays this project and puts it at jeopardy. And I think that's why the people elected us. We've never asked the people on something like this to let them make those kind of decisions.
I don't think we've ever borrowed almost $50 million either.
We're not borrowing anything.
We're funding it.
No, we're not. Well,
We're funding it.
the money, it's only coming from new services that don't exist today. So we're not funding anything from anything that exists today.
Understand.
So,
I would agree. That's why we were elected, why we're here to do our due diligence, which I think has been done over the last 6 to 8 months. I don't know if it's the largest project in terms of, inflationary over what was done 30, 40, 50 years ago. But I will tell you, in my opinion, this is a once in a generation opportunity. We talk about economic development all the time, and this is a once in a generation opportunity. And I'm excited, and I do appreciate the in-depth study. We talked about doing our due diligence. This was very in-depth. I appreciate the information, and I appreciate all the work that's been put into it and your time here today.
I just have one final comment too. Using the 250,000 projected people coming into our town, I'll use 50 weeks. That's 5,000 people a week that would be staying here, say in a 7-day period, which is about a third of our population of 16,000. So I wonder, as a council, does that mean that we increase police, fire accordingly by having an additional, basically increasing our population 30%?
I wish we could get credit for that additional, but they're spending a lot of money here, but it's going to generate, a lot of this is going to generate more money for the city. We're going to have more people paying for the sewer that comes in, the water that comes in. The people that put this analysis together have been through many projects like this. They've been very successful in running these businesses. There's no reason to believe that we could not handle this kind of thing. The fire department, police department were, I would argue, understaffed right now. This gives us an opportunity to pay for more officers that we need to have. And even maybe we talk about a new firehouse. Do we have an opportunity to build a new firehouse on the east side, which we've talked about? Because of some of this money, but there is no chance of doing these kind of things if we don't move ahead.
Good point.
There's a lot of things that we haven't talked about that bring things to the city. There's a lot of jobs that are on this list of how many people are going to be working here, and you say, well, we don't have enough people here. We do projects like this to bring people here, to build new housing, to increase the size of our schools, to increase the size of our community, the population base of the city. We've had complaints about Mattoon is, your population's going down. What a better opportunity than this to try to improve the size of the community and provide more for the community. I don't, if anybody's got a better idea, I say, come on, bring it forward. I haven't heard anybody come even close to this. The good news is we have a lot of good things still going on in the community, though. We have things this morning, Dunham Sports. I tell you what, I don't know if they made the decision exclusively just because Blake's such a good salesman to come here, but I can tell you that they're viewing this sports complex as an opportunity to sell more things. And those kind of things are going to happen. I would hate to pass on those things when the city takes virtually no risk. None. Only opportunity to grow. So any other questions anybody has? We have, again, we're not voting on anything. I have to make a motion about the COVID resolution. So I'm going to close this unless someone has a reason to go on. But and I'm also going to make a motion, then we'll adjourn. I moved to approve resolution number 2022-3199, approving the continuance of a local state of emergency due to the coronavirus COVID-19. Can I get a second on that motion?
I'll second that.
Commissioner Phipps, all
Roll call.
Commissioner Clausen.
Yes.
Commissioner Cox.
Yes.
Commissioner Graven.
Yes.
Commissioner Phipps.
Yes.
Mayor Hall.
Yes. Now, I need a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Commissioner Clausen, and a second?
Second.
Commissioner Cox, roll call.
Commissioner Clausen.
Yes.
Commissioner Cox.
Yes.
Commissioner Graven.
No.
Commissioner Phipps.
Yes.
Mayor Hall.
She always does that because she loves her job so much. Meeting adjourned.
And I have to take.
Yes, oh, yes.
We're president.
That's right.
All right.